I divorced my husband after 10 years of marriage. Even now, saying those words out loud feels strange. For months, I convinced myself it was the right decision. I repeated it so often that it became a routine, like brushing my teeth or locking the front door before bed. We grew apart. We weren't happy anymore. Love isn't enough. I said those things to my friends, to my family, even to myself in the mirror when I needed reassurance. But the truth was far more complicated. Because when the divorce papers were finally signed, when the silence settled into my apartment at night, and when there was nobody beside me in bed anymore, I started realizing something terrifying. I didn't know whether I had escaped a dying marriage or destroyed the only person who had ever truly loved me. The first night after the divorce became official, I sat alone on the kitchen floor eating cold takeout noodles from the carton. The apartment smelled like fresh paint because I had moved in only 2 weeks earlier, and everything still felt temporary. The walls were empty. The living room echoed. Even the refrigerator sounded louder than normal. I remember staring at my phone, expecting a message from Daniel. Not because we needed to discuss paperwork. Not because we forgot something. I just expected him to text me the way he always did after difficult days. Did you eat? That was the kind of husband he had been. The kind who remembered small things. The kind who noticed when I skipped meals because I was stressed. The kind who would drive across town at midnight just because I casually mentioned craving ice cream. For 10 years, that man had loved me consistently. And somehow I still walked away. At first, everyone supported my decision. My friends told me I deserved better. My sister insisted I had sacrificed too much of myself for the marriage. Even my coworkers treated me like a woman finally reclaiming her freedom. And instead of arguing, instead of defending himself, he simply looked defeated. That hurt more than anger would have. "I'm trying," he said quietly. But at the time, I didn't believe him. Or maybe I didn't want to. Things only got worse after that. The arguments became more frequent. Small disagreements turned into full-blown fights. Dirty dishes. Forgotten anniversaries. Late nights at work. Unanswered texts. Everything became ammunition. And somewhere in the middle of all that resentment, I met Evan. I wish I could say it happened dramatically. That there was instant chemistry or forbidden romance. But honestly, it started innocently. He worked in marketing at my company and had this effortless charm that made people feel special whenever he spoke to them. He listened carefully. He remembered details. He noticed when I changed my hair. And after years of feeling emotionally neglected, that attention felt intoxicating. One afternoon, we stayed late finishing a project together. Most of the office had already emptied out, leaving only the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "You seem tired," Evan said while handing me coffee. I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "A little." I thanked him before taking a sip. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" I hesitated. "Sure. Are you happy?" The question hit me harder than expected. Because nobody had asked me that in a very long time. Not even myself. I tried to answer casually. "I'm fine." He smiled slightly. That wasn't my question. And that moment stayed with me. I thought about it all night. "Are you happy?" At the time, I convinced myself the answer was no. Looking back now, I realize I was emotionally starving and mistook attention for understanding. Evan became my escape from reality. We started texting outside work. Then lunch breaks became daily routines. Then emotional conversations turned into flirtation. I told myself it wasn't cheating because nothing physical had happened. But deep down, I knew I was already crossing lines. Because every time Daniel tried talking to me, I compared him to another man. And comparison is poison in marriage. One evening, Daniel found me smiling at my phone. "Who's making you laugh?" he asked casually. I locked the screen immediately. No one. His expression changed almost instantly. Not anger. Not suspicion. Just hurt. It was subtle, but I noticed it. And for a brief second, guilt hit me hard enough to make my stomach twist. But instead of stopping, I pulled further away. That's the thing nobody tells you about emotional distance. Once resentment settles in, people stop seeing each other clearly. You stop remembering why you fell in love in the first place. Instead, every flaw becomes magnified. Every mistake feels intentional. Every silence feels personal. Months later, I asked Daniel for a divorce. I still remember his face. We were sitting in the living room on opposite ends of the couch like strangers renting the same space. At first, he genuinely thought I was joking. Then he saw my expression. "You're serious," he said quietly. "Yes." He stared at me for what felt like forever. Did I do something? The question shattered me because he sounded so confused. Like he truly didn't understand how we got there. And honestly, neither did I. "I'm not happy anymore," I whispered. He looked down at his hands, then nodded slowly. I expected him to argue, to fight for us. to beg me to stay. But he didn't. And somehow that hurt too. After several minutes of silence, he finally asked, "Is there someone else?" I answered too quickly. No. Technically, it was true. There was no affair. No physical betrayal. But emotionally, I had already left the marriage long before that conversation. Daniel inhaled deeply and leaned back against the couch. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted. Those words should have changed everything. But by then, my heart was too clouded with resentment to hear them properly. I thought freedom would make me happier. I imagined exciting new beginnings. Peace. Adventure. A chance to rediscover myself. Instead, I found silence. The kind that follows you around the house at night. The kind that makes you realize how much another person's presence once filled your life. I miss stupid things first. Hearing Daniel hum while making coffee. The way he always stole blankets in his sleep. How he kissed my forehead every morning even when we were fighting. And then came the memories. Good memories. The ones I had buried beneath years of frustration. I remembered us dancing barefoot in our first apartment because we couldn't afford furniture yet. I remembered the night we got caught in the rain during vacation and laughed like teenagers while running back to the hotel. I remembered him holding my hand at my father's funeral when I couldn't stop crying. Daniel had loved me through every version of myself. And I started wondering if I had abandoned him during one of his hardest seasons instead of helping him through it. 3 months after the divorce, I saw him again. Completely by accident. I was grocery shopping on a Thursday evening when I spotted him near the produce section. For a moment, I froze. He looked different. Healthier somehow. His beard was slightly longer, and he was wearing the gray sweater I bought him years ago for Christmas. He noticed me seconds later. And for a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled politely. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just politely. That hurt more than anger ever could. "Hey," he said. "Hey, how have you been?" "Good," I lied. He nodded slowly. "That's good." There was an awkward silence between us. The kind that only exists between people who once knew each other completely. I noticed he still bought the same coffee brand I liked. Still chose the green apples instead of red. Still checked expiration dates carefully because he was weirdly obsessive about freshness. 10 years together leaves fingerprints on a person. You don't erase that overnight. Before leaving, he looked at me one last time. "Take care of yourself, Claire." Claire. Not babe. Not sweetheart. Just Claire. And somehow, hearing my name from him felt devastating. That night, I cried harder than I had during the actual divorce. Because for the first time, I realized something horrifying. Daniel was learning how to live without me. And I wasn't sure I could do the same without him. The regret didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly. Quietly. Like water filling cracks in a wall. At first, I ignored it. I blamed loneliness. Adjustment. Fear of change. But eventually, the truth became impossible to avoid. I missed my husband. Not the fantasy version of marriage I had imagined. Not the excitement of something new. I missed the real man who had stood beside me for 10 years. The man who loved me consistently, even when life became repetitive and exhausting. And the worst part? I didn't know if I had realized it too late. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of checking Daniel's social media. He rarely posted before our divorce, but suddenly there were pictures. Hiking trips. Dinner with friends. A photo of him smiling beside a woman I didn't recognize. My chest tightened instantly. I stared at that picture for nearly 10 minutes. She was beautiful. Long dark hair. Bright smile. Her hand rested lightly against his arm. And Daniel looked genuinely happy. That image ruined me. Because I had spent months assuming he was miserable without me. Some arrogant part of me believed I would always remain the great love of his life. But people heal. People move forward. And suddenly, I realized I might become nothing more than a painful chapter in his past. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory came flooding back. Our wedding vows. The tiny house we dreamed of buying. The names we once picked for future children. The life we built together brick by brick. I kept replaying our last real conversation before everything fell apart. Not the divorce discussion. Not the arguments. A quieter moment. One I barely appreciated at the time. We had been lying in bed after midnight. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Daniel scrolled through work emails. Half asleep, I asked, "Do you think we'll always stay together?" He looked over immediately. "Of course. You sound pretty sure." "I am." "Why?" "Because loving you became part of who I am." At the time, I barely reacted. I was too distracted by resentment to absorb the weight of those words. But now they haunted me. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped treating love like something alive that needed care. I started treating it like something permanent. Guaranteed. And nothing destroys relationships faster than taking someone for granted. One rainy Sunday afternoon, my sister visited my apartment. She took one look at me curled beneath a blanket and sighed. "You still love him, don't you?" I stared at the television without answering. "That's not the problem," I finally whispered. "What is?" I don't know if he still loves me. She sat beside me quietly. Then she said something that changed everything. Maybe he does. But sometimes love gets tired too. That sentence stayed with me for days. Because I suddenly realized how exhausting I must have become during the final year of our marriage. Critical. Distant. Cold. Daniel wasn't perfect. Not even close. But neither was I. And for the first time since the divorce, I stopped viewing myself only as the victim. I started recognizing the damage I caused too. Weeks passed before I gathered enough courage to text him. I stared at the message box for nearly an hour. Finally, I typed, "Hey, I was wondering if maybe you'd want to grab coffee sometime." My hands shook before hitting send. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his reply came. "Maybe that's not a good idea." My chest sank. Still, I answered, "I understand." Several minutes passed before another message arrived. "I hope you're doing okay, Claire." That was it. No anger. No bitterness. Just distance. And somehow, distance from him hurt more than rejection. Because for 10 years, Daniel had been my safest place in the world. Now I was standing outside that door, realizing I might never be welcomed back in again. That night, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I didn't leave because I stopped loving my husband. I left because I stopped appreciating him while life became routine. And by the time I realized the difference, it was already too late. The hardest part about regret is that it doesn't arrive dramatically. There's no thunderstorm. No cinematic moment where your entire world suddenly collapses. Instead, it settles quietly into ordinary days. Into grocery store aisles. Empty parking spaces. Unanswered messages. It hides in small moments until one day you realize you're carrying grief everywhere you go. That was my life after Daniel. Not heartbreak in the traditional sense. Something worse. The unbearable realization that I had destroyed something good with my own hands. A month passed after my failed attempt to reconnect with him. Then another. And somehow, life kept moving even though I felt emotionally frozen. At work, I smiled when people spoke to me. I attended meetings. Answered emails. Laughed at jokes. But inside, everything felt hollow. Even Evan noticed. One afternoon, he leaned against my desk and frowned slightly. "You've been quiet lately." "I'm just tired." "You sure that's all?" I forced a small smile. "Yeah," but he didn't look convinced. Neither was I. The strange thing about emotional affairs is that once reality finally crashes into you, the fantasy disappears almost instantly. The attention Evan gave me used to feel exciting, comforting. Now it only made me uncomfortable, because I had finally understood something painful. I was never really falling in love with him. I was falling in love with being noticed. And there's a huge difference between the two. A week later, Evan asked me out to dinner. A few months earlier, I would have accepted immediately. This time, I hesitated. "Claire, I don't think that's a good idea." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Why not?" "Because my heart still belonged to another man. Because every conversation with him now felt like a reminder of the marriage I ruined. Because no amount of attention from someone new could replace 10 years of history." But I couldn't say any of that. So instead, I whispered, "I'm not ready." He looked disappointed, but he nodded respectfully. No pressure. After he walked away, I sat at my desk staring blankly at my computer screen. For the first time, I realized how deeply unhappy I truly was. Not because I was divorced. Because I had spent so long blaming Daniel for my loneliness that I never examined the emptiness inside myself. Marriage wasn't supposed to carry the full responsibility of my happiness. But somewhere along the way, I made him responsible for emotions I didn't even understand myself. And when he couldn't magically fix them, I started resenting him for it. That realization crushed me. Because it meant the collapse of our marriage wasn't entirely his fault. It wasn't even mostly his fault. That night, I opened an old storage box while searching for winter clothes. At the bottom, buried beneath sweaters and photo albums, I found our wedding video. I should have put it away immediately. Instead, I watched the entire thing. Every second. I watched 27-year-old Daniel standing nervously at the altar adjusting his tie every few seconds. I watched myself walking down the aisle with tears already in my eyes. I watched the way he looked at me. That expression destroyed me. Pure love. Pure certainty. Like he genuinely believed marrying me would be the happiest decision of his life. Halfway through the video, I broke down crying. Not delicate tears. Not movie tears. The ugly kind. The kind that makes your chest hurt. Because suddenly, I couldn't stop thinking about how much trust he had placed in me. And how carelessly I shattered it. I remembered our vows almost word for word. To choose each other even during difficult seasons. That line echoed in my head for hours afterward. Difficult seasons. Not perfect seasons. Not exciting seasons. Difficult ones. And instead of working through ours together, I walked away the moment things became emotionally exhausting. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "You okay?" Mothers always know. Even when you say nothing. I'm fine, I lied weakly. You've been saying that for months. I stayed silent. Then she asked quietly, do you regret it? The question hit me harder than expected. Because nobody in my life had asked me directly before. My friends only reassured me. My coworkers praised my independence. My sister came closest to understanding, but even she avoided forcing the truth out of me. But my mother? She always saw through me. And for the first time since the divorce, I answered honestly. Yes. The word came out broken. Small. Painful. There was silence on the other end before she finally sighed softly. Oh, sweetheart. I think I made the biggest mistake of my life. Have you told him that? No. Why not? Because I was terrified. Terrified he'd moved on. Terrified he no longer loved me. Terrified I had waited too long. I don't think I deserve another chance, I whispered. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, maybe not. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. After the call ended, I sat awake until nearly 3 in the morning thinking about Daniel. Not idealized memories. Real ones. I remembered his flaws clearly now. How stubborn he became during arguments. How work consumed too much of his attention. How emotionally closed off he could be sometimes. But strangely, those imperfections no longer felt unbearable. They felt human. And suddenly, I understood something marriage counselors probably say all the time. Long-term love isn't sustained by constant excitement. It survives through patience, grace, effort, forgiveness. Things I stopped giving him long before our divorce. The next weekend, I visited our old neighborhood. I told myself it was accidental. But deep down, I knew exactly why I went there. The coffee shop where we spent Saturday mornings was still open. The owner recognized me instantly. Well, look who's back. I smiled awkwardly. Haven't seen you in forever. Where's your husband? The question tightened my throat. We divorced. His expression immediately changed. Oh, I'm sorry. I nodded quickly and looked away. While waiting for my coffee, I noticed something carved into one of the wooden tables near the window. D+C. Inside a crooked heart. Daniel carved it years ago while I laughed and told him it looked ridiculous. I remember pretending to hate it. But secretly, I loved it. Now I stared at those initials with tears burning behind my eyes. Proof that we existed. Proof that once upon a time, we were deeply happy. And for the first time, I stopped rewriting history. Our marriage wasn't miserable. It wasn't toxic. It wasn't loveless. It became neglected. There's a difference. And neglect can quietly destroy even the strongest relationships if nobody notices the damage in time. As I walked back to my car, rain began falling lightly. And suddenly, I remembered another rainy afternoon years earlier. We had just moved into our second apartment together. The elevator was broken, and we carried furniture up 4 flights of stairs while soaked from the storm outside. At one point, I became so frustrated that I sat on the stairs refusing to move. Daniel laughed breathlessly and sat beside me. We're definitely never doing this again. We should have hired movers. We couldn't afford movers. Then we should have bought less furniture. He laughed again before wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You know what? What? One day we're going to miss this. I rolled my eyes at him back then. But he was right. I missed all of it now. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Because those difficult moments were proof that we built a life together instead of simply living beside each other. By December, nearly 8 months had passed since the divorce. And according to everyone around me, I was supposed to be healed by then. Instead, I felt worse. Daniel's birthday arrived 2 weeks before Christmas. For hours, I debated whether to text him. Eventually, emotion won. Happy birthday. I hope today is good to you. I stared at the message nervously. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then an hour. Finally, my phone buzzed. Thank you, Claire. That was all. Simple. Polite. Distant. I shouldn't have expected more. But disappointment still settled heavily in my chest. I kept rereading the message anyway. Like maybe hidden meaning existed somewhere between those 3 words. Pathetic. That's what regret does to people. It turns them into archaeologists searching through emotional ruins for signs that love still exists. A few days later, my sister dragged me to a Christmas market downtown. You need fresh air, she insisted. I need wine. You can have both. The streets glowed with holiday lights while music echoed softly between crowded booths. Couples walked hand in hand. Families laughed together. Children ran around excitedly holding cups of hot chocolate. And all I could think about was Daniel. Christmas used to be his favorite season. Every year, he forced me to watch terrible holiday movies while decorating the tree. Every year, he burned cookies because he refused to follow recipes properly. Every year, he wrapped presents horribly on purpose just to make me laugh. The memories hit so hard that I had to step away from the crowd for air. You okay? My sister asked carefully. I shook my head, then froze. Because across the street, standing beside a jewelry store window, was Daniel. And he wasn't alone. The same dark-haired woman from his social media stood beside him smiling. Her hand rested naturally against his chest while he said something that made her laugh. I couldn't breathe for a second. My sister noticed immediately. Oh no. I looked away quickly before they could see me. But the damage was already done. That image replayed in my head the entire night. Daniel looked comfortable beside her. Peaceful. Happy. And jealousy tore through me so violently that I barely recognized myself. Not because he moved on. Because part of me still believed he belonged to me emotionally even after I left him. How selfish is that? I shattered his heart and still expected him to stay emotionally frozen forever. That realization made me sick with guilt. Later that night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened our old wedding album. Photo after photo blurred through tears. There we were dancing at the reception. There we were feeding each other cake while laughing. There we were looking impossibly young and hopeful. I touched one picture carefully. Daniel's forehead rested against mine while both of us smiled with our eyes closed. God, we really loved each other. Not temporarily. Not casually. Deeply. And somehow I let temporary unhappiness blind me to something real. At nearly 2 in the morning, I finally made a decision. I couldn't continue living trapped between regret and fear. I needed closure. Even if it destroyed me. The next day, I texted him again. Can we talk? Just once. Please. This time, the response took hours. When it finally arrived, my hands trembled opening it. What about? I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then typed honestly. Us. No reply came that night. Or the next morning. By afternoon, I convinced myself he ignored me completely. Then finally, around 6 in the evening, another message appeared. One conversation. That's all. Relief and panic hit me simultaneously. We agreed to meet Saturday afternoon at a quiet restaurant near the river. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. Every possible outcome replayed endlessly in my head. Maybe he still loved me. Maybe he hated me. Maybe he'd moved on completely. Maybe this conversation would finally destroy the tiny hope I'd been clinging to for months. Saturday arrived cold and gray. I reached the restaurant 20 minutes early because anxiety wouldn't let me sit still at home. And when Daniel finally walked through the door, my heart reacted instantly. Some feelings never really leave. He spotted me near the window and paused briefly before approaching. Hey. He sat across from me carefully. There was no hostility in his expression. But there was caution. Like he no longer trusted me emotionally. And honestly, he had every reason not to. For several awkward minutes, we discussed meaningless things. Work. Weather. Traffic. 2 strangers pretending history didn't exist between them. Finally, Daniel sighed softly. You said you wanted to talk about us. I looked down at my hands. Then forced the words out. I made a mistake. Silence. Heavy silence. Daniel didn't react immediately. He just watched me carefully. I thought leaving would make me happier, I admitted shakily. But it didn't. He leaned back slowly. Claire. No, please let me finish. My voice cracked slightly. I blamed you for everything wrong in my life. I convinced myself our marriage was the problem instead of admitting I stopped trying to. His expression tightened subtly. Tears burned behind my eyes. I know I hurt you, I whispered. And I know I probably don't deserve another chance. But divorcing you is the biggest regret of my life. For several seconds, Daniel said absolutely nothing. Then finally, he looked away toward the river outside the window. You have any idea how badly that divorce destroyed me? The pain in his voice shattered something inside me. I'm sorry. I begged you to talk to me, to fight for us. But you were already gone. Tears slipped down my face silently. I know. You looked at me like I was the reason you were unhappy. I was wrong. Daniel rubbed a hand across his jaw slowly. I spent months wondering what I could have done differently. His voice sounded tired now. Not angry. Just tired. I would have fixed anything if you'd let me. That sentence nearly broke me completely. Because I finally understood the tragedy of our marriage. We both loved each other. But somewhere along the way, communication died before love did. And once silence replaces honesty, relationships begin collapsing quietly from the inside. Daniel stared down at the table for a long moment before finally asking the question I feared most. So why now? I swallowed hard. Because I still love you. His eyes closed briefly. Pain flashed across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Then he whispered something that completely shattered me. You don't get to tell me that after teaching me how to live without you. You don't get to tell me that after teaching me how to live without you. Those words stayed trapped in my chest long after Daniel said them. The restaurant suddenly felt too quiet, too small. I could hear the soft clinking of silverware from nearby tables, the muted sound of rain against the windows, and my own heartbeat pounding painfully in my ears. Daniel looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like loving me had once been easy, but surviving me had not. And for the first time since our divorce, I fully understood the damage I caused. Not theoretical damage. Not emotional inconvenience. Real damage. The kind that changes someone permanently. I wiped at my tears quickly, embarrassed by how badly my hands were shaking. I know I hurt you. Daniel gave a tired laugh without humor. Hurt me? His eyes finally met mine again. You shattered me, Claire. The honesty in his voice nearly crushed me. For years, I had convinced myself that because our marriage lacked excitement, it lacked love. But sitting across from him now, I realized something painful. Real love often looks ordinary while you're living inside it. It's not always dramatic kisses in the rain or grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it's consistency, patience, presence. The quiet comfort of knowing someone will still choose you on your worst days. And I threw that away because I mistook comfort for emptiness. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly. When you asked for the divorce, I honestly thought you were going through a phase. I stayed silent. At first, I kept believing you'd calm down and we'd fix things. His jaw tightened slightly. But then I realized you'd already emotionally left the marriage months earlier. Guilt burned through me instantly because he was right. Long before the paperwork. Long before the arguments. I had emotionally disconnected from him without even realizing how deeply. I should have fought harder too, I whispered. Daniel shook his head immediately. No. No, Claire. His voice remained calm, but firm. I wasn't perfect. I know that. I worked too much. I stopped paying attention to us the way I should have. He exhaled slowly. But marriage can survive mistakes. It can survive exhaustion. It can survive difficult seasons. His eyes darkened slightly. It struggles to survive when only one person is still trying. That sentence cut deeper than anything else he'd said. Because it was true. Toward the end of our marriage, Daniel kept reaching for me emotionally while I kept pulling away. Not because I hated him. Because resentment had convinced me distance was safer than vulnerability. I stared down at the table quietly. If I could take it back, I would. Daniel looked away for several seconds before answering. That's the problem with certain decisions. His voice softened. You don't always get to undo them just because you regret them later. Tears slid silently down my cheeks again. I didn't bother stopping them this time. Because no defense existed anymore. No excuses. No blaming him. No pretending I had been some deeply unhappy wife trapped in a hopeless marriage. The truth was uglier. We had a marriage that needed work. And instead of rebuilding it, I abandoned it. Daniel checked the time on his watch before looking back at me. I should go. Panic instantly rose in my chest. Just like that? Was this really the end? Daniel. He paused. I swallowed hard before asking the question that had haunted me for months. Are you in love with someone else? For the first time during our conversation, he hesitated. And somehow, that hesitation hurt more than a direct answer would have. Finally, he sighed quietly. I've been trying to move on. My chest tightened painfully. The woman from the Christmas market? He looked surprised for a second. You saw us. I nodded. Daniel leaned back slightly. Her name is Natalie. Even hearing another woman's name, the sight has felt unbearable. We've gone out a few times, he admitted carefully. The words hit like physical pain. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because I suddenly understood what losing someone truly meant. It means life continues without you. It means someone else eventually hears the jokes that once belonged to you. Someone else learns their favorite coffee order. Someone else gets the softer version of them after healing. And sometimes, the person you hurt becomes happier without you. That realization nearly broke me. Daniel studied my expression for a moment before speaking again. I cared about you for a very long time, Claire. Past tense. Cared. Not care. That tiny difference crushed me. I still care, he corrected softly, almost like he noticed my reaction. I probably always will. Hope flickered painfully inside me. But then he added, that doesn't mean I can trust you with my heart again. Silence settled between us. And honestly, I deserved that silence. Because trust isn't rebuilt through tears or regret. It's rebuilt through time. Consistency. Safety. Things I had destroyed. Daniel stood slowly from the table. I'm glad you were honest with me. I looked up quickly. That's it? What else do you want me to say? I don't know. That answer came out smaller than intended. For a brief moment, something emotional flickered across his face. Then disappeared again. You left, Claire. The pain in his voice returned instantly. You made a choice. I nodded weakly. I know. And I had to survive it. God. Hearing him say that hurt more than my own regret ever could. Because while I spent months drowning in loneliness, Daniel spent those same months rebuilding himself from emotional destruction I caused. That realization humbled me completely. He reached into his wallet, left cash on the table for his coffee, then looked at me one final time. I genuinely hope you find happiness. The sincerity in his voice made everything worse. Because despite everything, he still wanted good things for me. That was the kind of man he had always been. Kind. Even after pain. And I lost him. After he walked away, I stayed at the restaurant nearly 40 minutes unable to move. I kept replaying every word, every expression, every painful truth. Eventually, reality settled heavily inside me. Daniel still cared about me. But love after betrayal changes shape. And even though I hadn't cheated physically, emotional abandonment leaves scars too. Deep ones. The weeks after our conversation felt strange. Not better, but clearer. For the first time since the divorce, I stopped fantasizing about magically fixing everything. Real life wasn't a romance movie. I couldn't suddenly appear at his doorstep and erase months of pain with one emotional speech. Some damage simply takes time. And some people never fully recover from it. Oddly enough, accepting that truth became the beginning of my healing. Not because I stopped loving Daniel. Because I finally stopped centering my own regret above his pain. One night, my sister came over with takeout and immediately noticed the difference in me. You seem calmer. I'm trying to accept things. How did the conversation go? I stared quietly at my tea before answering. He was honest. And I deserved most of it. She frowned slightly. Don't punish yourself forever. I'm not. At least, I was trying not to. But I needed to hear it. My sister studied me carefully. You still want him back? I smiled sadly. Of course I do. And do you think that'll happen? That question lingered painfully in the air. Finally, I answered honestly. I don't know. And for once, I truly didn't. Months passed. Winter slowly turned into spring. And life kept moving forward whether I was emotionally ready or not. I started therapy. Something I probably should have done years earlier. At first, I hated it. Talking openly about my mistakes felt unbearable. But eventually, I began understanding myself more clearly. Why I depended so heavily on external validation. Why routine made me panic emotionally. Why I mistook temporary loneliness for permanent unhappiness. My therapist once told me something that stayed with me for weeks. Sometimes people destroy stable love because they confuse peace with boredom. That sentence described me perfectly. Daniel gave me stability for 10 years. And instead of appreciating it, I slowly became blind to its value because it no longer felt exciting. But stable love isn't supposed to feel like chaos. It's supposed to feel safe. I just understood that too late. Around April, I unexpectedly saw Daniel again. This time at a bookstore downtown. I noticed him standing near the history section flipping through a novel. For a moment, I considered leaving before he saw me. But then he looked up. Our eyes met instantly. And unlike the awkward tension from previous encounters, this time something felt softer. Not romantic exactly. Just less painful. Hey, he said quietly. Hey. He glanced toward the coffee shop inside the bookstore. You want coffee? My heart nearly stopped. But I nodded calmly. Sure. We sat near the window while afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the glass. And strangely, conversation came easier this time. We talked about work, books, random memories. Nothing heavy. Nothing emotional. Just two people slowly learning how to exist around each other again. At one point, Daniel laughed at something I said. A real laugh. The sound hit me like nostalgia. God, I missed hearing that. You seem better, he admitted after a while. I'm trying to be. He nodded thoughtfully. Therapy. I blinked in surprise. How did you know? A small smile appeared on his face. Because you're actually reflecting instead of just reacting. Fair enough. I laughed softly for the first time in what felt like forever. Then silence settled between us again. But this silence felt different from before. Not cold. Not hostile. Just thoughtful. Finally, Daniel spoke carefully. You know what hurt the most? I looked at him quietly. For a long time, I felt replaceable. Pain tightened in my chest instantly. You weren't. But that's how it felt. He looked down at his coffee. Like 10 years with me could suddenly be outweighed by attention from someone else. Tears threatened again. I never stopped loving you. Daniel's expression softened slightly. I believe that now. Now. Not then. And honestly, that made sense. Because love without effort eventually becomes difficult to recognize. He studied me for a moment before speaking again. You've changed. I had to. A faint smile touched his face. That's probably true. For the first time in nearly a year, hope returned carefully instead of desperately. Not fantasy. Not obsession. Just possibility. Before leaving the bookstore, Daniel stopped beside the entrance. I'm not promising anything, he said honestly. I know. But maybe. He hesitated slightly. Maybe we don't have to be strangers. My chest tightened instantly. Not strangers. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it also wasn't goodbye. And after everything we had destroyed, maybe that mattered more. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt communication. Very slowly. Coffee occasionally became dinner. Dinner became longer conversations. Long conversations became honesty neither of us had shown during the final years of our marriage. For the first time in a long time, we actually listened to each other. Not defensively. Not angrily. Honestly. One evening during summer, Daniel admitted something that stayed with me forever. When you left, I started questioning my entire worth as a husband. The pain in his voice still existed underneath the healing. And hearing that reminded me that regret alone doesn't erase consequences. Even when forgiveness begins, scars remain. I'm sorry, I whispered again. Daniel looked at me quietly before answering. I know. And somehow, those two words carried more peace than punishment. Months later, he invited me to dinner at our old apartment building rooftop. The same rooftop where he proposed to me 11 years earlier with cheap takeout and nervous hands. The city lights glowed around us while warm wind moved softly through the night air. You planned this on purpose, I said quietly. Maybe. I laughed softly. Then silence settled between us again. But this time, it felt familiar. Comfortable. Homelike. Daniel leaned against the railing beside me. You know, he said slowly, for a long time, I thought loving you ruined me. My chest tightened. He looked over at me carefully. But I think losing you forced me to finally see myself clearly too. I stayed silent. I wasn't emotionally present enough during our marriage. You were trying your best. So were you. That nearly made me cry. Because after everything, he still refused to paint me as a villain. Just human. Flawed. Lost. Trying. Daniel exhaled softly before reaching into his pocket. My heart stopped instantly when I saw the small velvet box. I'm not asking you to marry me again, he said quickly, noticing my expression. I let out a nervous laugh. Inside the box sat my original wedding ring, the one I returned during the divorce. I kept it, he admitted. I stared at it speechlessly. For months, I told myself I should throw it away. His voice softened. But I couldn't. Tears filled my eyes immediately. Daniel looked at me carefully. We can't go back to who we were. I know. But maybe. He hesitated slightly. Maybe we can build something healthier this time. I broke down crying instantly. Not because everything was magically fixed. Not because pain disappeared. But because real love had somehow survived long enough for both of us to finally grow into it properly. Daniel stepped closer slowly. Then after a brief hesitation, he wrapped his arms around me for the first time since our divorce. And somehow, after all the loneliness, regret, mistakes, and heartbreak, I finally understood something. Love doesn't die the moment people hurt each other. Sometimes it survives quietly beneath pride, resentment, and distance, waiting for two people mature enough to choose each other properly. This time, not because love felt exciting, but because we finally understood its value. And as Daniel held me beneath the city lights, I realized something I wished I had understood years earlier. The grass was never greener somewhere else. I was standing in a beautiful garden the entire time. I just stopped watering it.